Well, let's move on to something that actually is worth, kind of not necessarily fighting about, but debating. And that is obviously this massive crop of candidates we've got right now in the Democratic Party. And, earlier in the show, I actually spoke with Ben Dixon, and it's true. There is a lot of vitriol on Twitter. We see it. We see these people a lot of times wanting to relitigate 2016. They get personal, they get ugly, and this is coming from everywhere. But there is plenty of room to have sane, rational debate about these people running for president on the Democratic side. And it would be better to see people engaging in that kind of activity rather than just saying, nope, I'm never going to ever listen to you because I don't like you, and now I don't like your candidate because I don't like you. I mean, we see that far too often, but that's the preface. And I do want to talk about the candidates right now. So we've had some good polls come out this week. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren tied for first in the Monmouth poll. Biden, in third place, just 1 point behind them. Other polls still showing Biden ahead. When do you think Biden's dropping out?
Man, I think I'm terrible at predictions, but if I had to guess just based on the trajectory, I think he's going to be there until Iowa. I think he's hanging on until New Hampshire. I think that Super Tuesday is the day where this is really going to come down to like the top 3 candidates. And it's kind of shaping up, like I don't want to speak too soon, but it seems like this is shaping up to be a race between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, which is fantastic. These are the better candidates in the race. There's a lot of pretty solid candidates running, but, it would be nice to see Joe Biden drop out because out of all of the candidates, I feel like he would probably be the weakest choice against Donald Trump. And I understand that early polling is showing that he does perform relatively well against Trump, in these hypothetical matchups. But at the same time, Hillary Clinton did at this point in the race as well. And when it gets to that general election and you can no longer hide and you have to face the media, I just feel like we need someone who will excite the base, not go after Republicans and moderates. We need someone to recognize that we are in a polarized political environment. And what you have to do is play to your strength, get that base out, get them excited, register new voters. And really, the people who can do that are the left-wing candidates. So the sooner the better. That's my response to Joe Biden in terms of when he's going to drop out. I don't know when he will drop out specifically, but I've said this on my program before. We are all on the SS Biden ship, and it's as big as the Titanic, and there's an iceberg straight ahead. And look, this is the way I'm thinking about 2020 is not a presidential election. This is a Supreme Court election where Ruth Bader Ginsburg is hanging on presumably for dear life, and I don't want Donald Trump to fill that seat. And it's a little bit selfish, right? Because, of course, I care about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's health, but I also care about who controls the Supreme Court. So to me, this is basically about survival. This is about climate change. This is about just making sure that we don't get another 4 years of Donald Trump, which would be just disastrous. So anyone who I see who has red flags, who won't excite the base, I'm speaking out against. And people think that that's overly divisive. You'll see a lot of centrist Democrats, celebrities denounce that. I don't care. I don't want Donald Trump to win again. So I'm sorry, Joe Biden, you've got to go.
And see, that's a lot of, my point here too is we do have to call these people out for their flaws. And if they're not good enough, it's not just saying that this person's awful. It's you're really bad on these issues. You can either get better or you could not be in the race anymore. But you have issues as a candidate that in the long run is going to cost you dearly. And you have too many people who take that personally. These people out there who support the candidate so deeply that any criticism of their policies, which is what this is policy criticism, they take it as you just insulted, their own family member. And I don't want to get too bogged down in the minutia, but, I've said a couple things that, we're not necessarily wonderful about some of Andrew Yang's policies. I don't hate Andrew Yang as a person by any stretch of the imagination, but I don't think UBI is a magic bullet for the United States. And that kind of statement is going to get you swarmed on Twitter. You know, and it's disappointing because you have to understand that whoever it is you support, they're not without flaws, right? I mean, everybody has flaws. Elizabeth Warren, I love Elizabeth Warren. Starting to see more and more flaws that are making me not as happy as I was with you, you know, a month ago or 6 months ago. So we have to accept that. But what we do with that is then say, okay, candidate, you have to be better than this. You have to do better. And that's a lot of what we do when we call these people out. It's not just to say you're bad. It's, can you get better than this?
That's exactly right. And it's why we always have to stress this is not about personality. This is about policy. That's all that this is about. Like even Bernie Sanders, he's my number one choice by a mile and a half. But there are areas where he needs to improve. One of those areas was reparations. When he first was talking about it, I was cringing, you know. So these are areas that are there for us to criticize the candidates so they can improve, not to break them down. It's about really building them up. And it's funny that you say that about Andrew Yang. I just put out a video today about Andrew Yang, and I can already see the downvotes. And it's not like he's a bad person. It's just that there's area for growth. And even if I don't support him, I do think that UBI can potentially be a solution. But when Andrew Yang came on my show, I was critical of him, and I asked him, is it really fair that my dad, who's on Social Security, has to choose between UBI and the Social Security that he paid into his whole life, where someone who makes $100,000 per year just gets that extra $1,000 and they don't have to make that choice? Is that really fair? And that criticism was not intended to point out how horrible Andrew Yang is. I wanted him to improve. And a month or so later, he did, you know, adjust his UBI. Now, I still don't want it replacing any of our social safety net.
Right.
But I think that these criticisms, they're constructive. Like on the left, we care about policy. You know, we're glued to the policy substance. And even if we support Bernie Sanders and we have these, you know, these biases in favor of certain candidates over the others, at the end of the day, if somebody is going to be a flawed candidate to a degree, but they're still going to promote a policy idea that could potentially elevate it. Marianne Williamson, with regard to reparations, is an example. You know, I do think that that's important. So we're trying to build them up, not break them down, because we want to do more than just elect a candidate. We do want to change national discourse. And I think that that's what this is about. If you basically mute yourself and self-censor and say, well, you know, I like Andrew Yang, so I can't criticize any aspect of UBI ever. I mean, well, what's the point? If you truly care about UBI, understand that this is, you know, we need to have a robust conversation. UBI can be implemented in a very left-wing way. It can be implemented in a very right-wing way, which could act as a Trojan horse to gut our social safety net, which I don't want, you know. So these are the discussions that we have to have. And you know, it's not an election if people don't go at each other's throats, who are generally allies. So it's par for the course.
Yeah. And, you know, I hope that the discourse does continue. Yeah, I would like to see people maybe not throwing their vitriol, you know, at those of us on the left. There's plenty of people on the right, and you know, maybe some people disagree with me on this, but you know, that's where we need to direct the real, actual anger. You know, they're enacting horrible policies. Trump's trade war is destroying farmers' livelihoods across this country. We have children locked in cages, and now they want to lock them in those cages indefinitely. So maybe we save those really harsh criticisms, you know, those horrible words, for the people who support that, not the person who, you know, is disagreeing with your candidate's stance on this particular issue. We can debate those all day long, and we should. But the vitriol, there's people who deserve it, but it's not us on the left here, you know? I really think we need to work on where we're directing the anger and work on policies within our party. And to an extent, honestly, it is better than it was. It is much better than it was. People are understanding that. And you do see these great policy debates. But when people start speaking in absolutes, like with the Electoral College, saying that, nope, this is a dumb idea, we have to keep the Electoral College, and you're stupid if you think we should abolish it, you just lost me there, because you're clearly not open to any kind of criticism or intelligent back and forth on the issue.
Oh, totally. I absolutely agree. And, you know, this Democratic Party civil war, it's going to be an ongoing thing. But one thing that I've kind of become a lot more cognizant of is that, you know, while we're bickering, Republicans are, in fact, you know, they're becoming more powerful. Trump has stacked the judiciary. So it's okay for us to hash out these disagreements, but at the same time, we can't allow Republicans to get a pass, to squeak by and continue to ruin not just the country, but the planet. I mean, Donald Trump is saying nothing while Jair Bolsonaro is getting into these petty back and forths with Emmanuel Macron about the Amazon rainforest right now while it's burning. So, we have to basically walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that in 2019, going into the 2020 cycle, I do feel a little bit better knowing that, the left isn't just kind of ignoring the Republican Party. We're having our debate, but at the same time, we're also keeping an eye and, holding Trump's administration accountable. There's been a lot of solidarity, I think, for this impeaching Donald Trump movement that we see, and everyone is kind of, directing their ire towards Nancy Pelosi on, all sides of that Democratic Party civil war. So, little things like this that I feel a little bit optimistic about, although, my level of optimism will hinge on the 2020 election and that outcome mostly.
Well, let's hope the polls keep moving in the way that they're moving. Let's hope right now, the thing I love the most is the fact that the biggest thing happening in the primary is that Elizabeth and Bernie seem to have some kind of, policy competition happening. And that is the kind of thing that has been sorely missing from Democratic politics for 20 years at this point. They're trying to fight with one another to see who can come up with the most comprehensive, and it's not really a fight, but you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Here's my criminal justice reform plan. Well, here's my plan. Well, here's my environmental plan. Well, here's my environmental plan. They're not arguing that you're not electable or that I'm better than you. It's, I think my policy can go further. I think I can help more people with my policy. And that's the most refreshing thing happening in politics today, to me at least.
100%. It's to see them go tit for tat on something that benefits us, like who's going to benefit us more. I love this. Like when Elizabeth Warren came out and she announced her student loan debt cancellation plan, I said, this is phenomenal. I have been begging Bernie as a supporter to do something about student loan debt. Making college free is phenomenal. That's a great solution. But for those of us already burdened with student loan debt, you've got to do something. So she came out with that first. And then my reaction was to praise Elizabeth Warren and then say, okay, Bernie, she left you a little bit of room. She's not canceling 100%. And then, Bernie Sanders came out and canceled, 100%. And to see them go back and forth like this is exactly the result that we could ever hope for from a primary. And, comparing this to 2016, the difference is night and day when, it was these petty smears. Oh, well, Bernie supporters are Bernie bros. And, this sexist attack. Like to see real policy substance, it makes my, nerd heart just feel so warm. I love it.
It is wonderful. And, both of those student debt cancellation plans are better than Harris's, which, I can't even remember all the stipulations you have to hit in order to actually qualify for her partial student. It's insane. And that's why, Harris, Booker, Beto O'Rourke, to me, the most, I don't want to say most spectacular, but probably the weirdest thing is how spectacularly those three have just almost disappeared. And I know Harris is still in fourth place, but that's a distant fourth. Virtually tied with, Buttigieg, who 6 months ago, nobody in this country knew who he was. And for her to be, that low, almost about to be passed by Buttigieg, that to me is remarkable. These hardcore establishment folks just absolutely falling off the radar. And I think that is a good sign as we head or get closer, to Iowa here.
Yeah, I agree with that because it demonstrates to me that we were correct when we said that voters care about policy and they just cannot compete with the policies that are being put out by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And they know what is and isn't going to get them, the support of the Democratic Party electorate. We've kind of seen this with Kamala Harris, where she was seemingly a strong proponent of Medicare for all at the start of her campaign. And now she's essentially backed off. And now she's in favor of a type of pseudo glorified public option. I don't even know what it is because, she thought that she would be able to get the praise that Bernie Sanders gets, for example, by supporting Medicare for all, but also, kind of mute her biggest critics and saying, oh, well, you want to eliminate private insurance. So she thought that she could have her cake and eat it too, but people are married to the details and she's not talking to people. Like, people don't care about their private health insurance. So she thought that proposing a Medicare for all plus private would help her. It actually showed people that she is a flip-flopper. So when people are this, attentive to the very specific policy details, it really is heartwarming to see that because, I knew that people cared about the policies, but to know that they're this, worried about the details and concerned with the very specifics about the role of private and public, insurance, just for that one example, it's great to see. It shows that people know who is and isn't the real deal. And I really like that. Another thing is I still believe that we are in this anti-establishment mindset. People realize that the status quo, anyone who is promoting this idea that we need to keep the current, neoliberal establishment in place, they're just not going to get that much steam because I think that Democratic Party primary voters, they know more than Republican Party primary voters. So Donald Trump, he could easily say, I'm a populist. I care about the little guy, and nobody really looks deeper than just his rhetoric. But, on the left, we kind of had this pseudo-populist in Barack Obama. And so now we've been burned. He was more of a centrist. And now we realize, okay, we have to look at the very specific policy details as well as the campaign contributions that we're taking. So there's all of these things that we're looking out for. And you see that people, they care about the policies. And since people can't compete with Bernie Sanders and even Elizabeth Warren, we're seeing them slowly but surely decline in the polls. And you see the attempts by mainstream media to prop up these candidates, the glowing Chris Cillizza pieces of Pete Buttigieg, but it's not helping because you can just tell, that they aren't willing to change the system to the extent that Bernie wants to.
And that's what has to happen. That is the only thing that's going to fix what is wrong with this country today is broad, systemic, structural change. Anything short of that, it's not going to do what we need it to. Mike Figueredo, host of the Humanist Report, amazing show, amazing guest. Thank you very much for talking with us today. We definitely got to do this more frequently.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Farron. It's been a blast.